Are delighted today to have several people presenting with me on the evolving cannabis legal and regulatory landscape for 2026. If you're on this webinar, you're no doubt aware of many of the things that have been going on of late regarding the cannabis industry, and we'll get into those specifics shortly. But what I'd like to do first of all is first of all to welcome Anne Marie Sorrell. Anne Marie, we are absolutely delighted that you've joined us today. And I told Anne Marie shortly before this webinar that I was going to have a great trouble summarizing her background, that it would have taken the entire length of the webinar to do that. So, Anne Marie, if you could start off just by introducing yourself and a little and telling folks a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chris and Cogent Law, for having me. I'm really excited about our topic today and our discussion. Just a little bit of background. I am the president and CEO of the Mosaic Group. We are a 20-year-old advertising, marketing, public relations agency based in South Florida, but works all over the country as well as in the Caribbean. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Cannabis, where we are a member-based global organization that provides education, training, networking opportunities, and various resources for business owners as well as entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry. We've been doing this for 6 years now, and we're really looking forward to this conversation, but also, being that premier educational organization for those who are looking to grow and expand, and know how to do things the legal and right way in the industry so that they can be successful. So that's what we do. Of course, I wear other hats. I'm an elected official in Palm Beach County, as well as an author and public speaker. So just some additional hats there.
Yeah, great to have you with us, Anne Marie. And Suhiko, you've been with Cogent now for about 8 months, am I correct?
That's correct, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're a cannabis attorney, but you've got a pretty unique background. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. I guess one thing to sort of state as a framework is I started out in the law as a tax attorney back in the Stone Ages. So I very much think about both business and the law from that standpoint, but not alone. Um, the perspective I've taken for most of the time in the cannabis industry has been from the operator standpoint. I founded an outdoor cultivation facility in Massachusetts in 2019, and then started working up various positions, including a general manager for a vertically integrated operation in New York. Very much interested around the Northeast and outdoor cultivation in particular, but leveraging that into the entire supply chain. And my practice, which I sort of, I'm licensed in New York, and my practice has really been around helping businesses in New York, but also multi-state. My practice is almost exclusively a fractional GC type of practice, and sort of navigating the various operational pieces. And as us cannabis attorneys do, it covers a lot of ground, everything from startup and capitalization, and the various contracts, the commercial contracts that are involved in operations through compliance, and of course, 280E tax planning and structuring, et cetera.
Yeah, Suhiko, thanks very much. Having both that legal background as well as that insider background offers a great perspective there. Just a few words about me. I warned Anne Marie and Suhiko shortly before this that I was going to be the sidekick on this presentation because I am not a cannabis attorney. I'm a cannabis, I advise and consult with banks and credit unions looking to get into the cannabis banking space. I've been with Cogent for just over 2 years now. Prior to that, I was with a financial institution for close to 10 years, during which time we were one of the first in the country actually to start a cannabis banking program. and which grew exponentially during my tenure there. That was no credit to me. We just happened to be the only game in town. And prior to that, I was a financial regulatory attorney with the Maine Bureau of Financial Institutions. And it was during my final year there in 2014 when the FinCEN guidance on marijuana banking was issued. And our office advised a lot of our regulated entities, exactly what that may mean for them if they chose to get into the cannabis space. So I basically do four things for banks and credit unions. I help them to get into the cannabis space. If they're in that space and they want to expand into the lending space, I help them with that. I've helped a couple that have gotten into a bit of trouble with their regulators and have sought remediation. And then I also help. I've dealt with a few that have very well-developed, mature programs, but they've kind of gotten bogged down with some inefficiencies and are looking to make their cannabis banking program a little bit more cost effective, but at the same time staying on the right line with their regulators. So I help them with that. So anyway, that's enough about me. And I think really when Anne Marie and Suhiko were talking about doing this presentation, what really launched this presentation and the timing of it was the rescheduling order, the rescheduling executive order that was announced on December the 18th. And again, I'm gonna throw it over to Anne Marie or Suhiko maybe to talk. Let's talk first of all about what that executive order says, what it means, and what it doesn't mean. So, Anne Marie, maybe we'll start with you if you want to say just a few words about the executive order.
Yeah, I think from a general perspective, I think many of us are excited about the possibility of rescheduling. Some of us do believe that there needs to be more, like full legalization. And of course, rescheduling means a lot. And later on in our discussion, I will break down the possibilities of what that could mean for various operators and businesses, whether you're a cultivator or a retailer, or if you're in manufacturing, or if you're in research, what does that mean for you? So we'll go into more details about that. But the gist of it is that rescheduling from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 could potentially create opportunities for tax changes for businesses. It could create opportunities for more research and development, as well as opening up more banking and capital options as just some of the initial potential possibilities. But I do believe Sahiko can dive in a little bit more from a legal landscape and what that means for businesses, especially with 280E and some of the other implications.
Yeah. I think what I'll do first is I'll sort of kind of emphasize something Anne Marie said, which is an important kind of nuanced distinction here. There's many of us in the cannabis world who would, given our preferences, would deschedule instead of reschedule. So it's very important to kind of understand what the executive order did, what rescheduling means, as opposed to descheduling, and then the interplay, as you mentioned, with 280E. So that's a topic that in and of itself could be hours, but essentially the executive order begins the process to go through the administrative hearing, which is where it stands now. And as it stands, that hearing it's still pending. Now, a few things to say about that. After that process, there is sort of the post-hearing litigation potential, which could slow it down. So on the timing thing, we're still cannabis, right? So that means that we have to operate in a world of an enormous amount of uncertainty, right? And this is where, really having a team of advisors to kind of help navigate the possibility and optionality that you'll talk about is really critical. But until that process happens, until that is finalized, then as it stands, it is still federally illegal. Now, to your point, once that happens, and let's just assume it goes to Schedule 3, that means that now we are within the framework of the DEA, the FDA, and the process associated with that. And that in and of itself is also, it has its own framework. And so again, back to your initial statement here, which is important, and I think will weave into this conversation, because it is a rescheduling, it means that any operator who's operating outside of that framework is still outside of the Controlled Substance Act. In other words, operating still federally illegally. Now, that's something, very much to talk about. But let me then, the last subject and where this ties into 280E. 280E is not related to the Controlled Substance Act, except for in the tax code itself, Internal Revenue Code 280E, it specifically limits ordinary business deductions for any business, quote unquote, trafficking in Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So on its face, a Schedule 3 is no longer a violation, and therefore 280E no longer applies. However, it's important to also understand that in itself is also not necessarily a slam dunk, because there is a world in which there is some legislation, and actually that was recently proposed legislation to limit deductions for marijuana businesses under 280, basically making 280E still apply, changing the tax law so that 280E relief is not there. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's important to understand that is also a possibility in this complex framework.
So Nico, just to summarize what you've said, the as far as the rescheduling goes, uh, for uh, for medical operators, they can benefit from this if they choose to fall under a DEA or FDA approval regime. Then they will fall within this federally legal sphere. But adult use, recreational, whatever you want to call, as well as those medical operators that choose not to fall within the FDA, DEA approval registration process, they will continue to operate in a federally illegal space. Is that correct?
I would just sort of nuance around the edges a little bit. That's the basic concept. But think of it like this. It really wouldn't be drawn necessarily along the lines of state adult use versus medical. So in other words, it's not as though it's adult use medical that would become DEA licensed. And it's not necessarily that a recreational could not. And in matter of fact, so New York, for example, in order to be a manufacturer processor in New York, you have to have GMP certification. You have to go through the process for good manufacturing. And with that, right, so all the record keeping, the track and trace, and everything else related, you're already well on your way to get the DEA going through that process and becoming licensed. And so the same is true whether you're medical or recreational, but then from a business standpoint, it will be, it's going to be a decision that operators will have to make, and maybe not have to make. And again, we'll see how this all shakes out. But it will be a decision to make, and then probably it's either or. You're either outside of the framework or you're inside of the framework.
Yeah, thanks so
Although
much
that
for
may
that.
not be the case. You may be able to straddle both. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. Anne Marie, I want to go back to something that you mentioned regarding the executive order and that we would have 280E tax implications, but you also mentioned what effect that would have on the ability for research on cannabis. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so under the rescheduling, it opens up an opportunities for more clinical research, pharmaceutical research, and therapeutic studies can be improved. Right now, there's very limited research that can be done. And so with more research, what that does from a medical perspective, right, is that we're able to really look at conditions in a deeper way and say, okay, how does cannabis really, from what research shows, impact these various specific conditions, or how do we develop more strains or develop um, more wellness and therapeutic areas that cannabis can benefit its patients. So that, of course, that would then open up pharmaceutical companies. So that could be, depending on the side of the side of the conversation you're on with that, that could be great, but it can also maybe impact those current operators and current existing brands and products and things like that. So, but it does open up the opportunity for more pharmaceutical, more clinical research. Right now, there are no clinical studies being done in the cannabis industry. And when we talk about, as with any drug that, say, a pharmaceutical company develops, there's extensive clinical research that happens to see how it impacts various ethnicities, age groups, etc. In addition to whatever therapeutic condition is being treated. That does not currently happen with cannabis. So it would definitely open the doors for more of that to happen and for more development to happen within the cannabis space.
Yeah, long overdue.
Right.
Now, the third thing you mentioned, this is my opportunity to throw my 2 cents in worth, and that is what the rescheduling may mean from a banking perspective. And I think the most important thing that banks and credit unions need to realize is that even with rescheduling, even if it does move forward, the 2014 FinCEN guidance, which outlines the compliance requirements and burdens associated with cannabis banking, including the BSA filings that need to be made, that all remains in place for the time being. And that tends to be a bit of a bottleneck with a lot of banks and credit unions. That the It's a kind of a know your customer on steroids. That's what the FinCEN guidance is. There's kind of enhanced onboarding for cannabis businesses looking to get into a banking relationship. And then you have this ongoing account monitoring and ongoing due diligence, as well as the filings that need to be made. There are two types of filings that need to be made: SAR filings, suspicious activity reports, that need to be made even when there's no suspicious activity made, simply by virtue of the fact that they're operating in a federally illegal space. And then there are also CTR, currency transaction reports. And I can tell you, when I worked at my financial institution, we probably held the world record for the number of CTRs being filed for a financial institution, because these businesses continue to operate in a very cash intensive way. And so the CTR, the currency transaction reports, they mushroomed during our time when our cannabis banking program expanded. But enough about banking. I've said my 2 cents worth for the presentation. Um, uh, Suhiko, maybe I'll throw this one to you. What does rescheduling mean in terms of the state regulatory architecture? Does that change? Does that stay in place? What happens there?
Yeah, well, sort of this is kind of this segues from what I was saying a little earlier, right? If you don't go through the process and get the DEA register the licensing, then ultimately you're operating outside of federal law still. You're in a very similar position. Um, However, how the political landscape changes around that is TBD, right? And so it could be that the state licensing framework continues largely unchanged, especially for, let's say, the adult use type. Um, but it's really the attitude, coming down from, let's say, starting with the Cole memo, right? Ultimately, the direction to the AG not to use resources to prosecute otherwise state legal operations. And so ultimately, without something similar to that, I don't, well, up until recently, I would have said I don't see it backtracking. But as we see at state levels, there is the possibility of people clawing back even at the state level. So how that interchange actually plays out is again an area of great uncertainty. It's hard to predict, although my leaning today is that it would stay hopefully largely unchanged, at least on the recreational side.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the rollback. Even here in Maine, there was a citizens initiative
Yeah.
to basically roll back
Yeah.
adult use
Massachusetts as well.
in Massachusetts too. Now in
Yeah.
Maine, they did not get enough signatures for the ballot, so fortunately that has been put off.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of uncertainty there. But anyway, for now, state regulatory regimes remain by and large in place.
Yes.
The licensing requirements and so forth remain in place as well. Anne Marie, what in Florida? What is there anything going on in Florida? Uh,
Always
with
things going on in Florida. Well, you've probably heard we've had some challenges with getting adult use legalized and back on the ballot. So there was initially the petition number was met, and then I want to say close to 100,000 or so was thrown out. Um, and so there's been a push, and I forget, I don't have the latest. I believe the deadline was just recently, or is either upcoming for to get those additional signatures, so that way it could go on the ballot for November. So yeah, so that's we're waiting to see if these petitions, the new ones that had to get that number, 75,000, I believe it is. I'm sorry, it's more than 75,000, but whatever the number is that's required by the state of Florida, to get that number again, they only had literally like 2 months to try to pull that off. So, and it was the deadline is February. I can't remember the exact date in February, but this month, for us to know whether or not there's enough, whether or not it qualifies for the ballot. And if it does qualify for the ballot, then voters in Florida will be able to vote once again on whether or not they want to legalize in Florida adult use cannabis. Um, it did pass by our usual measures of 50% or above, but unfortunately in Florida, we have to have a 60% pass rate in order for it to become law. So that's where we are with that. There were a couple of hemp bills that we were watching as well. So I do need to get a status on where we are with those hemp bills in the Florida legislature, as we are currently in session until next month in the state. So Florida is definitely the place to keep watching, especially as we get through this legislative session next month, and then as we get through the ballot requirements.
I remember even when Trump was running as president, I think it was Amendment 3. I think this is what you were talking about, and I think it came as a bit of a surprise to everyone that I think it passed by a majority. I think it was 56 or 57%. It was very close, but they didn't get the required 60%. And so I think that came as a bit of a surprise to everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So we continue to press forward. I mean, even with, you know, hopefully this passes or actually gets on the ballot and then passes, but there's still a lot of work to be done as far as entry into the market, as far as equity and all of those, home grow, all those different options that other states have. Is still not a part of the conversation here in Florida. So we still have a lot of work to do.
Okay, good. And maybe we can come back, circle back. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about social equity, but I'll just to put that on hold for now. So Hiko, we're still operating in this federally illegal space. So what does that mean for interstate commerce? Anything change there?
No, no, and again, unless you're operating within a federally legal framework, well, uh, okay, that's the notwithstanding the dormant commerce clause challenges. Let's just say, that conversation aside, until it is illegal, until it is within a legal federal legal framework, that doesn't change. So again, you're sort of still in the same place where if you are, let's say, let's fast forward Schedule 3, and there's still this world in which there are adult use operators. They will still be subject to the same restrictions, right? Because they are outside of the federal framework. Um, so, that said, back to if you are within the DEA Schedule 3 framework, then that opens up. And I see a question really about advertising, and that sort of applies as well, right? There's a sort of similar way to analyze and think about it. Um, Now, I don't want to smuggle in that conversation because advertising is, not really my area of expertise, but to the extent I've been forced to think about it, I see, again, it's just overlapping, inconsistent frameworks, let's say, between state and federal that make it very difficult to navigate.
So I'm probably going to oversimplify this, but taking the scenario that I described earlier about these kind of three branches of cannabis industry, the adult use, the medical use that chooses to become FDA regulated, DEA regulated, and then the medical that chooses not to. That branch that chooses to fall within the FDA DEA framework, will they be permitted to conduct interstate commerce?
Yes. Yeah. So that's where that would open up interstate, international, subject to quotas and restrictions internationally. But yeah, it opens up a significantly larger market, which also again, tends to start to, I think about it in terms of changing the business model. It's very difficult to build a business, let's say, around a form factor of, let's say, a pill, and focus just on that, which is a very low capex but small market in within a state. But those types of things could open up, you aggregate across states.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Anne Marie, I'd like to come back to something you mentioned a short while ago, and that was hemp. And I know we could have a 2 hour discussion on what's going on with the hemp industry. But as you both, I'm sure, are aware, with the appropriations bill that was passed in November, Mitch McConnell threw in this provision at the 11th hour, which basically recriminalized the infused hemp industry market, subject to a year's grace period. And I know that there have been attempts to delay that further. But we talk about all the uncertainty that's going on with the cannabis industry, all the moving parts that are going on there. But I think that's probably exaggerated even more so when it comes to the hemp industry. And I can tell you from a banker's perspective, I'll just throw again, my 2 cents worth here is that, a lot of banks and credit unions, they chose not to bank cannabis, but to bank hemp because of the fact that they were operating essentially in a federally legal space and were not, they were a higher risk accounts, but there weren't the filing requirements or the risks associated with them now. But I'm working with a few now that have pretty significant hemp accounts, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. And there's even reference in the executive order to the fact that, and I think Trump was uncharacteristically polite. So when in his executive order, when he said he wanted to update I think that was the terminology he used, update the the hemp provisions in the Appropriation Act, realizing that, yeah, this is going to be a big conundrum for the hemp industry. So Hiko, do you want to talk a little bit about that? The hemp?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's again, we've got these inconsistent frameworks, right, based on a lot of legal definitions, and this overly restrictive new potential definition, I think, um, subject to changes in that language, it's yeah, I mean, it's very hard to predict how that plays out, but ultimately, it seems to be where it's heading. Again, a lot of uncertainty around the what the final language I think will be, how this interplays because it really is restrictive.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
thanks for
we
that.
it was the one area or one of the areas that many in the cannabis industry deemed safe, so to speak, for business and growth and development because we have the farm bill to protect, the hemp side. And now it's literally thrown into and unfortunately it kind of started here in Florida. It's been thrown into this whirlwind of, like you said, uncertainty. Um, and the reality is there's so much that can come from hemp cultivation. There's so many different types of products and derivatives that can come from hemp cultivation. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times we have legislatures, lawmakers who don't understand what it is that they're also making laws and policies about, and how the ripple effect or the domino effect impacts an entire industry. As you said, it's now going to impact banks because it impacts their customers. It's going to impact patients. It's going to impact the product and the supply chain and ecosystem. So there's so many different impacts that these, not to say that, yes, there probably have been some wrongdoers in the space, right? But it now is going to be, it's going to catapult across the industry. So it's definitely to keep our eyes on and how it unfolds. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think anyone who tries to predict what's going to happen in the future, you really want to. Yeah. I, for one, am very tired of being wrong in terms of predicting, what Washington is going to do. So I've given up that game entirely. I forgot, by the way, I was very negligent at the beginning of this session to lay out a couple of housekeeping details, and I know it's probably too late for this, but this presentation is probably going to go until about quarter to the hour or 10 to the hour. And then we are going to open this up for Q&A. And I do see that we already have a question in there. Thank you so much for that. We'll get to that. But that's worth thing. And please do put your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, as Travis did for us. So thanks for that, Travis. I do want to go back to the executive order. There are two things that we haven't talked about regarding the executive order. Firstly, uh, again, unfair question, but what are the chances of, in light of the executive order, what do all three of us see as the chances of rulemaking proceeding to actually get cannabis on Schedule 3? And then a secondary question, what do we see as the timing for that? And Suhiko, I'm going to be very unfair and start with you.
Um, depending, I'm going to change. I pretty much change my mind to that every time I look
You're
at the
not the
news. And,
only
and
one.
truth is, I don't have insider baseball, when it comes to, federal movement. So I'm really just basing this on the same news and media that everybody else sees. Ultimately, I think in January, I would have said it's almost a certainty. And I'm close to that. I still think it will happen. But how much can be delayed through post-hearing litigation and whatever other challenges is also remains to be seen. I mean, it does seem like there is quite a bit of support, but things like the bill to remove the 280E relief and the various other challenges that have been put forward is, it's I'm not I don't know how optimistic I am about whether it'll happen in 26, but I would put the fact that it will happen at a higher, it's much more likely than not. But within what time frame, that's one, I break out in cold sweats when people try to force me to say a date on that.
Yeah, Anne Marie, I'm going to ask you the same unfair questions. What do you think about the prospects of rescheduling actually moving forward and any insights on timing?
So I'll put my political hat on. In what would normally be a political climate where there's a midterm coming up, you would normally see things being pushed through and pressure being put on departments like the DEA and all of that to get things moving so that way it's in favor of the incumbent parties. That is under normal political circumstances. So we may see as we get closer to these midterms really heating up that there's a push to kind of move the process forward and at least get some more traction so it's not kind of like a thump on the wall that was like, oh, there was an executive order, but nothing else has happened, right? So politically, we might see that happen. If that does not happen, then I have to agree with Zoiko that we might be waiting until the next uh, possible election, which is would be the warm up for 2028. And then we'd see some movement in 2027 because we then have a presidential election coming up. And we would then see some movement then. That is my political hat. That's the take I would, be most comfortable weighing my bet on because this is a very uh, political administration that wants to have all the highlights possible in its favor. So I think from that perspective, if we don't see things kind of shift for the midterm, I think we'll definitely see a shift as we get into the presidential elections for 2028.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you just in terms of the prospects for rescheduling actually happening. I think it is going to happen. Uh, and that stems really just based on the way this current administration works. You know, uh, President Trump seems the influence rather than going up to President Trump kind of goes the other way. It's, what President Trump says, people, whether they agree or disagree with him within the administration or the agencies, federal agencies, they're going to bow to that. And President Trump has said that he wants to see cannabis rescheduled. So, whatever one's feelings about the current administration, I think, given the personality of our president, I am optimistic that it's going to happen based on the way influence is now working in Washington. And Suhiko, I agree with both of you too in terms of the timing of this. I think I did hear from somebody who Bob Hoban, who's was a very renowned cannabis attorney who advises foreign governments on cannabis regulation. I heard from him several weeks ago that we may be seeing something coming out in the Federal Register for proposed rulemaking on cannabis in the not too distant future. But I do think and I also think it's going to be litigated. I think the rulemaking is going to be litigated. I know that they are lining up a team right now to litigate the rulemaking process, and so that again, I hate to make predictions, but if I had to make one, I would say that the if we have an effective rule in place, it's not going to be until 2027 at the earliest, I think, given the fact that we're going to have litigation in place that could hold things up for a long, long time. Anne Marie, I want to come back to something you mentioned. We talked a little bit about the research and that kind of thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of career opportunity, if rescheduling moves forward, what kind of career opportunities might be open to individuals who are interested in getting into this area at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll talk about two. The business opportunities, definitely include, especially on the ancillary side, there's opportunities for technology, HVAC, security, transportation, CPAs, attorneys, et cetera, to um, get more into this space, especially if rescheduling happens. There'll be a lot more expertise needed to just work with everyone that wants to and is currently participating in this space. From a career perspective, wow, the opportunities are endless. I mean, there are careers in retail operations, starting as entry level as a bud tender, all the way up to operations manager, to a store manager, a retail manager. There's cultivation opportunities in the growing space. There's opportunities in finance. There's opportunities in compliance and regulatory guidance, data insights, data analytics, technology. There's all types of technology needed, not just from a software perspective, but even hardware, robotics, etc., that this industry could benefit from. So the opportunities are pretty endless when you think about whether it's a business or a career track within a cannabis space. So if you're not looking at cannabis for a career, or even young people that may be listening, or if you have young people within your circle, it's definitely a place for them to look and consider as a developing and emerging market.
It's interesting. When I was at my financial institution in Maine, uh, both the security industries as well as the HVAC industries, they had a wonderfully burgeoning businesses because of the cannabis industry here. And those ancillary businesses, they present a conundrum very often for banks and credit unions. How are they supposed to be treated? And so there's a lot of uncertainty there. So those are very interesting perspectives as well. So and I can also tell you that on the you mentioned the finance and compliance side. So cannabis. How do you underwrite a cannabis business? It's kind of like agriculture underwriting. It's a very specialized field, but even more specialized than ag lending because it's in this extreme, highly regulated industry. So with these compliance burdens associated, seasonal yet compliance burdens, you've got a lot of intermingling factors involved just from an underwriting perspective. And then I'm also seeing a lot of career opportunity, just on the Bank Secrecy Act slash compliance side. When I started at my financial institution, our BSA compliance department was a department of half a person, and that was me. And when I left, close to 10 years later, we had 8 people. And that was primarily because of our cannabis banking program. So Hiko, maybe you can talk a little bit about it from the legal side.
Yeah, yeah, and also I would think you have some ideas about the operational side. Um, and because what we've been talking about is you've got cannabis, right? THC cannabis, you've got hemp, and then you've got this potential rescheduling. And one thing to keep in mind is hemp, kind of the absurdity of this is that it is botanically exactly the same as cannabis. And really this legal definition of THC is really the only distinction, which it's very hard to cram biology into these legal frameworks, right? Hence a lot of these problems. But I say this to say, if you sort of think about the process of cultivating that cannabis plant and then converting it into consumer products, that fundamental knowledge, right? The cultivation, the processing, the GMP practices, all the manufacturing, all the breakdown, all of that that happens is the same. So whatever skill set you develop, whether or not it's in hemp or in cannabis, um, it it would seem to me that that knowledge would carry over into whatever the industry evolves into, right? Um, and then, what I think about now from kind of the sort of near term operational side is, and I think I mentioned this, but really all of the structuring, the tax planning, and then something that's very, very common in cannabis industries is the toll manufacturing, white labeling, and contract manufacturing types of relationships. Those contracts are very much driven by this 280E issue. So it's I think very important to kind of build into a startup the structure, and that includes the chart of accounts that you set up in order to keep track of the 280E, but then also have the optionality where you can restructure it, which then I think downstream of there are the relationships in terms of profit splits, royalties, tolling fees, and those types of things that you put into the contracts. Makes it a lot easier, but in some ways, if 280E goes away.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Lots and lots of opportunities. And Anne Marie, why don't you talk a little bit about your the programs that you have underway with Cannabisiac?
Absolutely. Thank you. So we have monthly webinars where we take a deep dive into various topics in the industry, whether it's, something like, terpenes or understanding the endocannabinoid system, or even looking at financing your business and access to capital. We really go through various topics. So that happens monthly with our webinar series, as well as our book of the month, where we feature a business author to talk about their expertise, take a deep dive into that particular subject matter. But we also have a business incubator program, which is anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks, where whether you're starting out, we take you through the business planning process all the way through your opportunity deck and making sure that you have a solid business plan and business model. And then we also have our medical cannabis program for those who are healthcare professionals who want to have a better understanding of cannabis healthcare perspective, the scientific side, different benefits as well as conditions, side effects, pediatrics in cannabis. We cover all of that in our medical program. And then we have a Cannabis 101 as well. This is for those who may know nothing about the plant and they're really trying to get an understanding. So we really do a deep dive from history all the way through prohibition, through the science, etc. So those are just some of the courses we offer. We are partnering with organizations like Cogent Law to offer even more courses that you can that are self-paced, learn at your own pace as well. So and we are a membership organization, so there are different benefits to being a member where some courses and events are complimentary if you're a member. There's speaking opportunities, there are business to business exchange opportunities and networking. So we have kind of a full community for you to become a part of with Cannabis yet. And we have an upcoming roadshow. Yes, I would be remiss if I didn't do that shameless plug where we're doing 6 cities, 3 countries, including New Jersey, Florida, sorry, Denver, Colorado. So Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Denver, Colorado, Chicago, Illinois, Toronto, Canada, Kingston, Jamaica, and New Jersey, Jersey City, New Jersey. So hopefully you can join us on the road show this summer, starting in May.
Yeah, and I, for one, am going to be at the New Jersey one on June the 27th. Really looking forward to that. Those should be extremely worthwhile to attend. Well, we've come up to the we're come up to 10:02, and I want to be very respectful of people's time. Um, and we do have one question here. Travis, with STNR Media and STNR TV, how do these changes affect advertising and media? We run an OTT Roku network for cannabis content and currently are working on selling our ad rolls off. Uh, I'm not one to take this one on. Can I punt on this, uh, Suhiko or Anne Marie?
So you go, you have
I can throw some words at that. But again, this is really not my area of
Yeah.
expertise. Media is its own. What I can talk about just is from experience, in particular, let's say New York, Massachusetts, and the operating. Um, so, long story short, right? There's a lot of restrictions. It's not necessarily just one framework. That restrict how and where and all of the advertising and media. And so some of the restrictions have to do with, let's say, the platform itself and their terms of use. That influences comes from again, probably a lot of it is black box. In almost well, in every state that I'm aware of, let's just say every state, there's also advertising restrictions built into the state laws themselves, which itself leads to a lot of inconsistencies and interesting scenarios where you'll find billboards in Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York for cannabis companies that are in other states, not in their own state, right? Because a a cannabis company in some states can have a billboard in their own state, but there's very little stopping them from having a billboard in another state, right? On the border. So this is all to say that this is still very complicated, but I think simplified. Again, if something is operating and you're selling something under the DEA, the Schedule 3 framework, then a lot of these problems open up, right? Very similar to the question around interstate commerce or this interplay between the state continuing to operate under their existing frameworks and this sort of parallel DEA framework.
Yeah, I think yeah, for that segment of the cannabis businesses that do choose to fall under the DEA FDA regime, there will be regulations issued which will prescribe in great detail what kind of just as with the as with the pharmaceutical industry now in terms of what how these businesses can advertise. And I think for the time being, if you follow whatever your whatever state regulatory regime tells you in terms of how you can advertise if they're available.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're not going to see any new rulings on advertising until the DEA, FDA approves it. And I agree with Chris. It'll more than likely have the do's and don'ts, what you can say, what you cannot say, any medical claims, et cetera, just as the pharmaceutical company has. So I would caution against probably running ads right now on Roku unless you have some type of situation that we don't know about. But and again, it also will be determined by your state because most ads are placed within, based on my advertising experience, they're placed within different geographical locations. So it's going to be based on your state's advertising guidelines for cannabis as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anne Marie. Let's go on to the second question. Pharma is in the same class as the presented rescheduling. When do you think insurance companies will jump on rewriting their policies to charge for claims? So I can briefly respond to that. I do know that it's insurance is kind of like banking. There are a few insurance companies that are in the cannabis space. They are few and far between. And we actually had an issue at my financial institution in terms of getting coverage for our officers and directors because of the fact that we were in a cannabis space, officers and directors liability insurance. So again, it's a very, very slow moving wheel, but I think and Cogent, we if you're looking for we're very big on referrals at Cogent, and if you're looking for a partner to help with insurance matters, we can certainly help with that. What about this next question here? What would be the first step to breaking into a burgeoning recreational cannabis industry? For instance, Virginia. That's one I think we could spend a long time talking about. But I'm going to be very, very unfair, and Suhiko, I'm going to throw that one to you.
No worries. So the first thing that I would always recommend doing is get as much information and as much clarity you can about the market and the regulatory framework, the licensing framework. And that always starts with just a simple Google search or whatever engines AI, and say really with the question number one. And if you use some of the generative AI, you can sort of ask more generalized questions. But essentially, number one, what are the requirements and steps to get a recreational license in state, whatever case may be, Virginia in this case. And then the second, I would say, is if there's an existing medical, find out exactly what that market size is, how long it's been open, and then start to get a sense of what you think top line total, let's say total addressable market for the state. Remember, interstate commerce still doesn't apply, so it's only within whatever state that it is. So you can limit your research, and then start to build out the business model for whatever it is whatever business you are interested in developing. Build the business model, and then the framework for the licensing and all of that will kind of give you all of the other pieces that you'll need, real estate requirements, business organization, and so forth.
Yeah. You can also look at, because you weren't very specific on the type of business that you want to start. So, of course, understanding the framework and what licenses are available, if it's vertically integrated or not, is important. But then if you're on the ancillary side where you may not require a license, then it's just understanding what ancillary business is, meaning like professional services, um, businesses that are not plant touching, that may not require certain license. You can also look at those as opportunities, which are also less costly to um, enter the market as a business. So there are many ways you can look at it. Just depends on what you're interested in doing in the industry.
It's a very good point, Anne Marie. And back to sort of this uncertainty of rescheduling, if you can find a very good ancillary business for these types of this industry, that's something actually that does leave yourself open for a lot of pivots, right? A lot of change, because these are services that it's more likely than not that they will always be needed in this industry, however it plays out from sort of the legal framework. So that's actually, yeah, if you really want to start dipping your toes in, find some business where you don't need all of the same capital requirements and administrative requirements of getting a license.
Yeah, I say look at your skill set. What are you really good at and that you love? And can it be transferable into the cannabis industry? And nine times out of ten, it probably can be.
Anne Marie, that's a great point. So listen, we're coming up to the top of our hour. As I said at the beginning, I do want to be very respectful of people's time. Uh, Suhiko and Anne Marie, thank you so much for your contribution to this. Been a great dialogue. I've really enjoyed this. And just as importantly, I want to thank everyone who took the time to sign up and register and listen to this webinar. The fact that you're part of this discussion is really, really important. This is an ever evolving subject area. And, we're constantly, all three of us on this, we're learning as we go. So, kudos to you for attending this webinar. And again, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.